Can you see my screen?
Yep, if you could blow it up to presentation mode, there you go. That's better.
All right. So this is a highly abbreviated and probably amplified version of a previous presentation that I have done before. The change from before is make it really practical and sort of remove any of the extra slash educational content. The purpose is, as what the title says, I want to give you 3 easy steps to start using spots. Going back to the previous conversation on scoring, there is a great there is a great opportunity. Do you see the window, everybody's face, or I'm the only one seeing it? The
On the
gallery.
side.
Yeah. Okay, I got rid of it.
Okay,
All right.
good.
So I'm a firm believer that assisted can really help people do better at a number of different levels, ultimately increasing their score, helping them work more DX slash more multipliers, and last but not least, help us with our YCCC score, right? By knowing where the multipliers are, by knowing what bands are open, you can certainly increase your rate. You can score higher point count. You can be a lot more efficient, right? You no longer have to spin the VFO knob. And last but not least, really hone your strategy based on real-time understanding of where the activities are, what you can copy, what others can copy, and what your neighbors can copy. Just as a reminder, and this is an important one, it is important to remember how actually spots originate. So there are 3 sources. The first one is the humans. This is the least number of spots. They're usually related to phone, and they're highly unreliable, both in terms of accuracy of the call sign, frequency, and so on and so on. The bulk of the spots come from skimmers, not for all modes, CW, digital, and Rudy. And last but not least, particularly with the proliferation of contests that allow self-spotting, we're seeing a lot more spots originating from loggers for those modes like phone where there isn't a skimmer technology. At a high level, this is what the flow of spots looks like. I will save you the minutiae of how spots get from the skimmers to the clusters. For the purpose of this conversation, we're going to focus on 2 areas, which is the cluster and N1MM. I would imagine other loggers are similar, but again, I'm so used to N1MM, I feel comfortable doing the show and tell using N1MM. You may have to talk to Paul if you want to figure out how to do this in the Xlog. So what are the 3 steps? I really promise you they're going to be very, very simple. The first one is pick a cluster, which is fairly straightforward, should not take a lot of time, and you do it really only once. The second one is configure the cluster. I also promise you is going to be super easy, no complicated commands to remember and type. And last but not least, making sure that incorporate all that data into your logger. So again, I start my search for clusters, although I haven't really searched for one for a long time, in N1MM. When you go to the clusters tab and when you check the box for NA only, you can pull down the menu and you can see a very, very large number of clusters that are available. I pay attention to the numbers on the very right, which is the percentage of cluster connections that were successful and how many were made in total. So you see the number of people that have connected to that cluster and their success rate. Keep in mind that this is an important consideration since uh, clusters are really operated by volunteers. They have different hardware, bandwidth, capacity, and so on. Some of them have UPSs, some don't. So it is more common not to have high availability than find clusters with high availability. And my second criteria, and I'm really not going to be apologetic for this. Again, I'm lazy and I want to keep things as simple as possible. I would only look for CC clusters. And the reason this is the case is because, in my opinion, they do the best job cleaning up busted calls without really any type of filtering. You don't have to lift a finger. The cluster does it for you. And the second reason, it is still one of the only two um, cluster packages that are being actively developed and maintained. So when major bugs show up, uh, they're they're addressed and they're fixed. And last but not least, not all clusters support self-spotting. Again, maybe 5 years ago, this was not a consideration, but in the year 2025, this is a consideration. So step number 2, how do we configure the cluster? And as I promised, uh, I will keep it very, very, very simple. There are two options. Option number 1 for those that do like to manage the volume of data and the type of data coming from the cluster. There are just a few commands that you need to remember for CC cluster. The general format is here on the left. You turn on or off the skimmer feed, and you enable or disable particular modes based on what you want to work. So in the upcoming contest, this is what the set of filters would look like. Set skimmer will turn on the skimmer spots, and then the next 3 commands are going to turn off the modes that you don't care about, CW, FT4, and FT8. Likewise for ARRL, CW, again, you will turn on the skimmer spots, you will kill Rudy, you will kill FT4, you will kill FT8, and because we did not disable CW, CW is going to continue flowing. So that's really the idea. You can see how it works for digital contests, and for phone, there isn't really much to do other than turn off the skimmer altogether. If you have more compute capacity and network bandwidth, and you don't want to fiddle with what I just shared, the various commands for configuring the cluster, and this is what I do, I actually let N1MM do the work. Basically, what I do is in the Benson mode tab, I turn on the contest selection, which allows N1MM to make choices for me. And similarly, in the available windows and multipliers window, I do the same. Hey, show me only things that are important to me for that particular contest. If you're doing SO2R, focus on the focus radio. Again, this is not for everybody, especially if you're doing RIDI on an older computer. The volume of spots unless filtered may actually slow it down, and you may see occasional freezes on the screen. I do want to have a quick note on the concept of filtering. I've mentioned this before. This is not any different than some of the age-old debates of iOS versus Android, or an icon versus Canon, or Windows versus Mac OS. It's a very personal, very philosophical question and personal choice. It really boils down to 2 schools of thought. Do you want to keep the aperture as wide as open and have full situational awareness so that uh, you know not only what your nearby stations can hear, but also what the propagation on the other end of the path looks like, or maybe on a global scale, then you keep it wide open. If, on the other hand, for whatever considerations, maybe you have a really small station and you don't care about what everybody else works other than your immediate neighbors, maybe you keep very tight filters. Again, I'm a firm believer in situational awareness. I do not use any filters. Having said that, step number 3, I believe, is extremely valuable one, which is without imposing any DX or spotter filters or quality of spots, which does not exist in the CC world, in the CC cluster world, you actually pick preferred spotters. And the reason you may want to pick preferred spotters is because they might be in an area where you have a lot of other spotters and you really want to focus on just the subset of skimmers that do a very good job listening and hearing. Um, or in my case, if you're running a local skimmer, you really want to make sure that you don't miss your local spots because those are spots that have the greatest confidence that you can hear and presumably work. So I'm a firm believer in using this field here, which is defining preferred spotters. I'm giving you some examples. Will is in Albany, which is probably the westernmost part of the circle. Then we have Dave in New Hampshire, which is a great location to run a skimmer. And in my case, I'm also using my local skimmer. When when you're looking for what would be a good preferred spotter to enter here, I would use two data sources. I'm a firm believer in making decisions by data as opposed to just faking it. So I look at two data sources. The first one is the SM7ION stats page, which shows how many spots, CW and Rudy spots, each skimmer out there has generated. So that gives you a pretty good understanding of what their listening capabilities are. And if you're considering a broader set of operating modes, if you want to factor in FT4, FT8, or broader propagation monitoring tools like Whisper, then you go to PSK Reporter. Their stats page gives you rankings by how many spots each skimmer has generated, and also a breakdown by band and breakdown by the XCC entity. So as oh, okay. One more screen, one more slide, which really shows what the end user experience looks like. I'm using only the Telnet window. I actually don't show the Telnet window when I operate. I rely on the band map and the available cues and multipliers, but the concept is the same. In whatever window you're looking at, those preferred skimmers are going to be highlighted. In this particular case, this is orange. This is the color I have chosen for highlighting items on the screen. For your color setup in N1MM, this is going to be different. So there you have it. As I promised, it's really three very easy steps. No crazy commands to remember. Keep it super simple. Questions?
Excellent. So your node obviously runs the CC cluster.
It does, but the salient point is I don't care what node you use. I want people to use CC cluster because it makes life so much easier. And at the end of the day, spots are spots. After a second or two or five, everybody has the same spots. So that's not where the magic happens. The magic happens is in the ability to get rid of busted spots. And there's some
Rudy, I have a, oh, sorry.
there are some cultural considerations as well. For the past 2 weeks, the ex-spider community has been obsessed with managing and toning down self-spotting. And to me, again, very personal topic. I think that's the wrong direction. I don't believe clusters should be getting in the way of managing self-spotting. CC cluster doesn't really get in the middle to make these decisions.
I have a question. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer it, but for worldwide last year RTTY, I used a local skimmer. It was not connected to a cluster. What's the volume? What's the expected volume from a cluster for a contest like WPX RTTY?
I would go back to the RBN archive for that particular contest and pull down the archive. I would say the numbers are staggering.
Yes.
if I remember correctly, my skimmer generated 40,000 spots per weekend,
Wow.
per day. So it's
Wow.
a very, very high volume. But again, I would let the cluster actually manage that volume. They do some deduping so that you don't have to see the same spot from the same spotter 50,000 times or once every 5 seconds. And second, remember, N1MM does a fantastic job managing that volume of data, assuming you have a reasonably modern computer. So don't let the numbers scare you. I think they're manageable. Um, and that's the beauty of the skimmer technology. It really gives you all the data you need to have fun and make informed decisions how and where to run.
Okay. Thank you.
How and where to run, by the way, I really want to emphasize this because in those philosophical debates, wide open filters versus narrow filters, one point often gets forgotten, which is when you run, you really do care about your run frequency. And just because in your headphones it sounds clear doesn't mean that it is clear on the other side of the path. And this is where wide filters really help you because you can see whether or not there are 5 other Italian stations on the same frequency running CQ, and nobody can copy you. So keep that in mind. It's not just about finding stuff, but also understanding how loud you are on the other end of the path.
Yeah, situational awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I send the PDF with this, there is a little additional information in the appendix. If you do want to go fancy and actually manage the filters in CC cluster, there's a little utility called CC user, and I have some screenshots showing you how to use that utility to set up filters. Again, I'm not doing it because I do believe in the wide open filters, but people have different operating preferences, and CC user is a good way of managing your cluster.
All right.
Any questions? Is everybody going to be assisted?
That's a good question
I think
because
everybody should be. It's a lot more
you
fun.
can't go for the overlay, right? If you're assisted in high power, you can't go for
Uh,
the classic overlay, right? So that's a good question.
yeah, for the classic overlay, you're right. For the overlays such as tri-bander and wires, I don't think it makes any difference. I think you can still run assisted and actually take advantage of those overlays.
But then I lose the high power, right?
I know they're not mutually exclusive. You can be low power or high power, assisted or
Right.
unassisted.
Right. So sorry, looking at the rules, that's right. So the problem with the tri-bander is we have a quad band Yagi, so unfortunately with 2 feed lines. So looking at the rules, it excludes me from the tri-bander category, unfortunately. But yeah, but anyway, sorry, that's sidetracking a little bit.
Yeah. And I will go back to what Mike was describing before. It's really about time spent operating button chair and the productivity of that time, being able to maximize multipliers, overall score, and ultimately club score. So I'm a genuine believer that assisted is not for wimps. Assisted actually is for just as good operators because in many ways assistance is a distraction, and being able to balance the distraction versus staying focused, running, or whatever other goal you're pursuing is not that trivial. So um, I think it's for good operators and for novices. Anyway, so ready to do propagation?
Um, we actually have a